Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode 45. In today's episode, the Communication Diva discusses the role of silence in effective communication. That's right, a podcast on silence. Cue the music.
Welcome to Communication Diva, the podcast that explores communication and helps you to communicate more deeply with those you love. I'm Jenn Swanson, and I'm thanking you for listening today. I am sitting here in my podcasting studio, and I can hear a flock of Canada geese flying overhead, and I just love that sound. It's the sound of fall. And they fly in great big V-shaped groups, and they're very loud, which is appropriate for today, because today I wanted to talk about silence. My husband Scott and I are heading off to a 3-day silent retreat with several of our colleagues, and this will be 3 days of no agenda, 3 days of doing nothing but walking outside around a lake or a labyrinth, of sleeping, of resting and praying, of eating food somebody else prepares, and of connecting with the inner self. So one of the things to say about that is that being quiet for 3 days is not easy for a podcaster. You have to believe that. But life has been really busy and stressful, and I am so looking forward to the sacred quiet. And so that's what's happening next. So this episode is a little bit shorter than usual, and that is partly because of time and partly because of silence, to give space for that. So why did I entitle this The Sweet Skill of Silence? Well, I think it's a skill, and sometimes it can be more effective than anything else you could possibly say, being silent. We aren't used to being quiet, at least not here in North America, and I'd love to hear from those of you in other countries about how noisy it is where you are and how silence is used or not used in your lives. Here in North America, there's always something going on. In fact, it was interesting. Recently, one of the drugstore chains got a lot of feedback this past week here because they started playing Christmas music the day after Halloween on November 1st. All of the stores started blaring Christmas music in the background, and people got upset. People complained, and thankfully they stopped. But because it's a little early, really. But everywhere you go, there is background music, there is noise, there are people, there's technology making ringings and beepings and whirrings, and things are loud. So, the sweet skill of silence. In conversation at times, especially when the topic is heavy, silence can feel awkward if you're not used to it, but it can also be used carefully to invite other comments from the other person, to invite further conversation. And it can feel weird and awkward at first, but it is really something to try out. For example, if you ask somebody a question and they give you a very quick answer that you don't think is the whole entire answer, if you think they're holding something back, just being quiet for a moment might cause the other person to continue speaking. You know, people don't like a void, and silence can feel like a void that needs filling. So sometimes just being quiet and waiting will cause the person to continue their thought and to say more or say something on a deeper level. So the tool or the skill of being silent when you think there's more that could be said, rather than asking for come on, tell me what you're really thinking. Just wait and be quiet and see what happens. And sometimes you'd be surprised at what comes forth. Silence can also be used to punctuate a point. So if you're speaking before a group and you're making an important point, or even if you're speaking to an individual, giving a space or pausing for a few moments can allow the listener or listeners to absorb what it is you've just said. So if you say something that you think is an important point, being quiet can give them space to really hear what it is you've just said. So if you rush forward, the impact of your words might not be fully realized. Another common thing is to ask a question of an individual or a group and then not wait long enough before continuing. So as a teacher, this is something I've learned to do, because sometimes if I ask a group a question, does anybody have, or I'll say something like, does anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay, great. And then carry on. Well, there might be somebody in the class who is a little bit nervous about asking the question that they might have, or is trying to formulate the words and how to ask that question in their mind. And so waiting for a few seconds, and sometimes it feels a bit awkward and it feels a little bit long, but just waiting sometimes can bring forth the question that person was maybe too shy to ask, or was wondering if someone else was going to ask it and didn't. So I have learned over the years, and it's been a lot of years of teaching, 19 or something, to wait after I say, does anybody have any questions? And just wait. And it feels natural to me. And sometimes the students call me on it and they say, we noticed that you wait a really long time after you ask that question. I said, yeah, I do that, and I do it on purpose because I think it's important to wait sometimes. So if you're in a private conversation with one other person and you ask a question, just wait and see. Maybe they don't have their answer thought through. Maybe they need a moment to think before they answer your question. But asking the question and then being quiet is important, because if you ask the question, you don't get an answer right away, and then you ask 5 more questions, they're going to forget what your first question was, and you're not going to get the answer that you were hoping for in the first place. So leaving enough silence after you ask the question can bring forth what is really on the heart and mind of the person you are with, and it is a skill. It is a skill. Another good use of silence is when you're in situations where you don't know what to say. So there are times, actually, when it's better to say nothing at all. Sometimes just being with someone, just holding their hand or giving them a hug is all that is needed. There's the saying that we are human beings, not human doings, but for some reason we want to do something. And there are times when words just don't communicate any better than silence and presence would. So just being at the bedside of somebody who is ill, just holding the crying child to calm them down, can be more powerful than anything that possibly could be said. And this is particularly true and powerful in situations of loss and grief, when someone has lost a loved one. And, we often don't know what to say. And sometimes it's better not to say anything. Sometimes it's better to just give them a hug, or just listen to their story about what happened, or just be with them physically. And that can be much more powerful than, giving platitudes or saying, oh, I'm really sorry for your loss, which is such an overused and tired expression here anyway. So silence can be a much better option in these cases. The last thing I wanted to say about silence is that active listening involves being quiet on the part of the listener. Listening doesn't mean giving advice or talking about yourself or making commentary on what you're hearing. And it's funny because sometimes I give an exercise to my class about active listening, and in one of the exercises, the students will often say, I'm going to actively listen to my friends and give them advice on this topic. And I say, no, the giving of advice is not part of active listening. Active listening means being quiet. It doesn't mean talking about yourself or making commentary on what you've just heard. It means giving the gift of your full attention to another person. And I mean giving a gift, because often we are not listened to. And that is a complaint, a common complaint. Nobody listens to me. So listening and being quiet means holding space and allowing the other person to communicate. Your silence communicates loudly, believe it or not. It communicates warmth and care and empathy and respect and all the things that can be conveyed by simply listening to somebody else. So this is a powerful skill and not one that everybody is good at. So if you are paying attention to how people are listening, you might notice that some people are very, very good at this and some people could use a little work. If you want to practice the sweet skill of silence, first be aware of places in your conversations where you maybe interrupt or you jump in before the other person is finished, and try to notice those times and try to stop doing those things. And that's the first step, is just noticing, right? Being aware of something that you are doing that you could improve upon. And then practice noticing yourself when you're in the listening position. So if you are somebody who is supposed to be listening, try noticing how you're doing at that. How are you at not interrupting or not jumping in? And how are you at leaving some space? Try to insert a little more silence into the conversation and just see what effect it has, because I think you will find that it does have an effect. So that is how you can practice the skill of silence, by first being aware of places where you could be silent and you're not, and places where silence would be a useful tool, a useful skill for bringing forth more information from the other person, more conversation, and improving the communication that you are having. So that's all the time I have today. I have a bookcase that I need to finish painting here. I have to pack a suitcase and get ready to get on a ferry to the island for this 3-day silent retreat. And I will be thinking of you as I enjoy the quiet out in the nature of Vancouver Island. And I will be hoping that you will be sending me some correspondence and commenting on the topic of silence as a skill. I also hope that you find a little sweet silence in your world this next week. Until next time, this is Jenn Swanson with the Communication Diva podcast. Be good to yourselves.